Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tanya Bartolini. I'm a business and real estate attorney in South Florida. I have the employment law attorney, Ms. Kimberly Gilmore, here with me today as well. We're going to be discussing the CARES Act and the family medical leave and some employment issues as well. So if that's what you're here for, then you are in the right place. So a little bit of housekeeping first. Everybody, please keep your lines on mute. Also, please be aware that this does not create an attorney-client relationship. This is not confidential. It's not to be construed as legal advice, and it is being recorded and will be shared. If you have any questions throughout the presentations, please go to the icon that says chat, put your questions in there, and at the end of the presentation, Kim and I will try to answer as many questions as we can within the time that we have allotted. So let's dive right in. First, with the CARES Act. One of the things the CARES Act is doing is giving individuals some stimulus packages. Those packages are as follows. It's $1,200 per person, $500 per child, rebates by the IRS. Now, those are based on 2018 or 2019 tax returns for people who have already filed. And the income limitations are $75,000 per individual, $112,500 for head of household, and $150,000 for joint filings. That's not to say that if you made more, you won't get anything. It's simply that the IRS will lower the amount that they're going to give you based on your income if it's higher. Also, as individuals, you can withdraw up to $100,000 from retirement plans in 2020 without any penalties. Student loan payments have been suspended for 6 months with no interest accruals. If people are in student loan forgiveness programs, those 6 months will be deemed paid. Now, the unemployment has increased by $600. Which Ms. Gilmore will talk a little bit more about. And also you can request suspension of mortgage payments for any mortgages that are guaranteed by FHA, Fannie Mae, or Freddie Mac. For businesses, there are a few stimulus packages for businesses. The SBA 7A loan program has been expanded. They have the Paychex Protection Program. There's an economic injury disaster loan. There is payroll tax deferment, employee retention credit, and also some changes dealing with business losses, charitable contributions, etc., that you can take advantage of on your 2020 tax returns for next year. As far as the economic injury disaster loan, this is open to businesses with 500 employees or less, including self-employed and independent contractors. Okay, so you do not have to have the 2 employee to 500 limitation. You must have an economic injury or the reasonable belief that you will have an economic injury due to the pandemic. The SBA may advance up to $10,000 within 3 days of receiving the application, and the money is to be used for employee retention, payroll costs, rent, mortgage payments, and repayment of business debt. Now, there is no requirement to repay this advance. There are caveats, however, which I will get into later on. Now, the next one is the Paychex Protection Program. That is also open to businesses with 500 employees or less, including self-employed and independent contractors. You must have an economic injury due to the pandemic. Now, this loan is up to $10 million or 250% of the average monthly payroll cost. The way you calculate the payroll cost is not just strict payroll. You can use owner benefits, healthcare benefits, distributions, things of that nature to calculate what that amount of the loan is going to be. The interest rate is capped at 4%. The payments are deferred for 6 months. You can request a deferment up to a year. And you can also apply for loan forgiveness for up to 8 weeks of payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utility payments only. So what people are not understanding about this loan is that once you receive the money, the 8 weeks after that are the ones that you can actually use to ask for the loan forgiveness. My suggestion is that you put that money in a completely separate bank account and you use it to pay for payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utility payments only, so that when you do ask for the forgiveness, you can show exactly where that money went, and you can show that it did go to these things, and you can ask for the forgiveness. Because if you don't use them for these things and you don't use them within that 8 weeks, you're not going to be able to get that forgiveness. The caveat that I was talking about for the economic injury loan, if you do get an advance, you do not have to pay it back. However, if you do get another loan, like the Paycheck Protection Program, you will have to roll that into it, and the forgiveness amount will be lowered by the amount of the advance. So you cannot have both an advance that you don't have to pay back and the full forgiveness. The payroll tax deferral. You can defer paying your portion of the Social Security payroll tax through December 2020. You will have 2 years thereafter to pay it back. Self-employed and independent contractors may defer 50% of their Social Security tax payment with the same terms. The employee retention credit is a retention credit. It's fully refundable tax credit for employers who must partially or fully suspend operations due to the pandemic or government orders during a calendar quarter, or experience a significant decline in gross receipts during a calendar quarter, starting with the quarter with over 50% loss and ending with the quarter at 80% loss. So for example, let's say this quarter, the business is experiencing a 48% loss as compared to the same quarter in 2019. This is when the credit starts for the employers. Next year, you have a 75% loss as compared to the year after. Third quarter, you have an 83% loss, and fourth quarter is 90. So you would be able to take advantage of the employee retention credit for the first, second, and third quarters. It will end on the first day of the fourth quarter because your loss is now over the 80%, or your loss is less than the 80%, excuse me. That credit is equal to 50% of qualified wages, including health plan expenses, for each employee who is not working that you paid. The maximum credit is $5,000 per employee, and government employers and self-employed individuals are not eligible. Now, here are the loan resources. For the Florida Bridge loans, which I did not speak about much because I do not believe that they're good for you. If you do a Florida Bridge loan, they're capped at 12% interest. It could be anywhere, you know, from 1 or 0% to 12%. And you will have to pay it all back before you can apply for the disaster loans, or the Paycheck Protection Program loans. The bridge loans do not seem to be forgivable at this time, although we have no idea what they're going to do later on with that. And as I said, with the economic injury disaster loan, I advise that if you do have an economic injury, you apply to the economic injury disaster loan, you get the advance, You also apply to the Paychecks Protection Program and see which one gives you better options. In order to figure out what your options are, you have to know what your financials are. So you have to go with your CPA, an attorney, whomever you have that's a confidant that can help you decipher where you are financially, where you're expecting to be financially through the end of the year, so that you can figure out which program is going to benefit you the most, because you cannot use multiple programs. At this point, the way the 880 pages read, it appears that you can get the Paychecks Protection Program loan, and if you choose to use the credit or the tax, payroll tax deferrals, I think you can do so without requesting a forgiveness of the Paychecks Protection loan. The only thing it says is that you cannot use the forgiveness and the credits or the deferrals all at the same time. I'm going to pass this now to Ms. Gilmore to talk about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you everyone for participating today. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act took effect yesterday, April 1st, 2020. The act applies to private employers that have fewer than 500 employees. And there are some exceptions for employers that have 50 or less employees. But for the most part, the act is designed to increase sick pay leave and also the benefits of the Family Medical Leave Act, which were designed for employers with 50 or more employees. And one of the act is designed to provide benefits to employees and at the same time provide tax credits to employers that provide these benefits, such as the sick pay leave and also extending the Family Medical Leave Act to allow them to take up to 12 weeks of a reduced paid leave. And the intent by the federal government is to allow the employees to take a leave and not have to worry, do I have to do give up my paycheck in order to care for my health, myself and my loved ones because I have the coronavirus? And so that's what the intent is. There are two types of benefits. The first one is the emergency sick pay, and this applies to any employee who is currently working as of April 1st, 2020. And there are 6 qualifying events, so it isn't automatic that an employee is entitled to receive the maximum benefit of 80 hours as long as they are considered a full-time employee, which means that they work 40 hours a week. According to the Act, if they work less than 40 hours, then they're considered part-time. But the maximum benefit for an employee would be up to 80 hours at their regular rate. And the qualifying events that the Department of Labor has listed are that there is an order, whether it's local, state, or federal, that there is quarantine or isolation, that the employee has been advised by a health care provider that they need to self-quarantine due to the COVID-19, that the employee is experiencing symptoms of the COVID-19 and is seeking medical diagnosis, that the employee is caring for an individual who is subject to an order about isolation or quarantine, and that the employee is caring for a child that's under the age of 18 because of the fact that their school or daycare has closed. And I imagine this is where most of the claims are going to come in because of all the school closings and so forth. Now, in addition, there's also the emergency family medical leave. And this applies to anyone who's been employed at least 30 calendar days. And this would allow them to take up to 12 weeks of leave and receive some compensation, but they are also guaranteed that when they come back, similar to the Family Medical Leave Act, that they are entitled to their job or a job that is considered to be compensable with what they had prior to taking the leave. And so this is really expanding to small employers the benefits and the requirements of the Family Medical Leave Act. Now, there's some terminology that you hear: furloughs, layoffs, reduced hours. Generally, a furlough was dealing with the military, that you were not did not have to, work, your job had been furloughed. A layoff is talking about where there may be a facility that's closing or reducing or eliminating your position. And so keep in mind, if you don't have a job, then these benefits will not help you or assist you, and you're not entitled to them. And that's when then you would have to seek unemployment. And I'll talk about unemployment a little bit later. Again, with the reduced hours, you've been a full-time employee, and now let's say you're working part-time, you're working half the hours that you used to work. The sick leave may not be used to cover the difference so that you're still receiving your full pay. The sick leave is when you need to not work because let's say you're caring for your child who's no longer in school, but it cannot be used to cover the difference. And as I said, the maximum benefit that you're entitled to is up to 80 hours. And then if you need to take more time off, that's when then you would apply for the leave through your employer, and you would be entitled to up to an additional 10 weeks. So it's a total of 12 weeks. And the compensation that would be entitled to for the 10 weeks that you're on leave is 2/3 of what you were making before. And now people have asked me questions about, well, what's the rate, or what am I paying my employees? And again, you look at prior to April 1st of 2020, what was their regular rate? Were they being paid $15 an hour, $20 an hour, or were they being paid minimum wage? And that's what you're looking at. For those employees that are considered part-time, in order to calculate, you look at the prior 2 weeks to determine how many hours, and then that's what they would be eligible, or you would be required as the employer to pay, and what the employee would receive. And so again, remember that if for some reason your business has already closed down, your employer's closed, then you're going to have to seek benefits from unemployment for the state of Florida. And also there is additional compensation, which Tanya mentioned, through the CARES Act of the additional $600. Terms. One thing that's important to remember is all employers, whether you have one employee or you have hundreds, there is a new workplace poster that must be displayed in the workplace and also communicated to any employees that you have that work remotely. Go to the Department of Labor website, which is dol.gov, and they have those posters right there that you can download. And the poster is very beneficial because I'm just going to read a little bit. It explains, it says right at the top, employee rights, paid sick leave, and expanded family and medical leave under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And it goes through and says that this takes effect on April 1st and it ends on December 31st. But it talks about the paid leave entitlements. It talks about eligible employees, which I had gone through previously. It talks about qualifying reasons for the leave related to COVID-19. And then it talks about enforcement. So this is also a good resource to answer, some basic questions that somebody may have. The law does provide for penalties and violations ramifications, so that you cannot discriminate against employees, and you certainly as an employer cannot retaliate. So if an employee asks for a leave, they can't be terminated because they asked for some type of compensation under the act. The enforcement will be based on the Fair Labor Standards Act for those employers, which would be all employers, well, almost all employers, or the Family Medical Leave Act as far as how it would be enforced and what the requirements would be. But I can tell you that similar to both the FLSA and FMLA, if there is a violation, the employee is entitled to their back wages. They're entitled to liquidated damages. There's also a provision for attorney's fees, which can be very expensive. And then there's also penalties of fines for any type of a violation. So it is important to know what you're doing, and if you have questions, to seek counsel to make sure that you're doing it properly. Now I want to talk just a little bit about Florida unemployment. And unfortunately, the unemployment system was bad prior to this pandemic, and my understanding from talking to people and hearing stories and on the internet is it has only gotten worse. But currently, unemployment in Florida, you are entitled to $275 per week. It doesn't matter how much money you made on a weekly basis. That is the maximum a person is entitled to. That is probably going to change, but right now it's $275. And it's for 12 weeks. Again, I believe that that's going to change to increase for the length of time, because we have done that in Florida in the past when there's been some, the economy has been really bad. But in addition, under the federal statutes, you're going to be entitled to an additional $600 a week for up to 4 months. So that's the added benefit from the federal government. I do believe that the Florida is going to change theirs, but how much or when or how, that I don't know. And also, you can apply in Florida if there's been a partial reduction in your hours. So I think that's why before the seminar started, Tanya told me that she just saw something where there was, I think she said 6.6 million people had applied for unemployment in the U.S., and that's just staggering. And so I wasn't able to find any specifics for Florida prior to the seminar, but I did go on the website, and I can tell you that they are making changes on a daily basis to the website and the process and what is required. So just, be patient. You do have to apply online. So that's why I say be patient. They have 800 numbers, but I don't think they're really working. And the website is www.floridajobs.org for anybody that needs that type of information. So in conclusion, I would just say to, be patient, use your common sense, whether you're an employer, employee, individual, and to be safe. And I think at this point, we're going to open it up to some questions.
Okay, thank you, Kim. First, I just wanted to let everybody know, as far as the SBA loans and these loans that are under the CARES Act, you do not have to do a personal guarantee, and you do not have to have security for those loans. Those things have been done away with. The first question we have is, if you are a realtor and a 1099, can you apply for a PPP, which is the Paychecks Protection Program? Is that advisable, or is there a better option? Well, the first part of your question, as far as can you apply, yes. All of these loans have been open to self-employed and independent contractors. So anybody can apply. Is there a better option? Well, that depends on your own personal situation. This is why it is imperative that you know what your financials are. Go back and see what your average payroll has been for the past 12 months so that you can see you know, what potentially you can get as a loan from the PPP. You also need to make sure that you know what all of the owner benefits are that you spent, health benefits, distributions, because you can add all of those into the quote unquote payroll cost to determine how much you can get as a loan. Thereafter, you have to figure out what are your projected expenses as far as payroll costs, rent or mortgage interest, and utility payments for the next 8 weeks. That's going to tell you the amount that you may be able to get forgiven from the Paycheck Protection Program. You can apply for multiple loans. You cannot close on multiple loans. So that's the difference. You can apply to them, see what rates they give you, see how much money they're going to give you. With all your financials in hand, you can figure out which one is going to work best for you. If you have the money, the cash flow, or the capital to be able to pay your employees and keep going without taking out the loans, then you can also look at the employer credit, and you can look at the payroll deferment, because some of those might work best for you. So it is imperative that you look at your financials. And if anybody needs help with that, obviously we're here. There's other attorneys and CPAs who are more than happy to help you as well. The next question is, how is the government going to track loan forgiveness? Seems like an administrative nightmare. It is. That's why I said the best thing to do is to take your money that you're getting for the loans and put it in a completely separate account. Because when you do ask for the forgiveness, you're going to have to show proof that you use that money for the uses that it's intended for. Payroll tax, utility payments, rent, or mortgage interest. And it'll be much easier to prove that when you have it all in a separate account. Okay, I believe this one is for you, Kim. What happens when employer requires employee to continue to work when employee is afraid and wants to stay home?
It's a good question. And it's really a balancing act, because in Florida, we're an at-will jurisdiction. So the employee can't be forced to work. If they truly feel that they are, not safe, then they do not have to come to work, but then they risk the fact that they could be terminated. So it's a balancing act. And in that situation, if they want to stay home, then they're not entitled to any of these benefits under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. But I would hope that an employer would be a little bit more understanding. And again, this is a time when the employer and employee need to sit down, safely distance of 6 feet, but talk about what is the concern that the employee has, or what is it that the employer is demanding that the employee do, and how can both sides come to a resolution so that it works out well for everybody.
Okay, another question for you. Why would someone choose FMLA over unemployment if they would only get 2/3 pay with FMLA?
Good question. And the reason for that FMLA is that you are guaranteed your job when you come back from the leave, versus if you go and apply for unemployment, then you may not be rehired. So there are protections that apply under the Act associated with the Family Medical Leave Act, that a person upon returning is entitled to a similar position, if not the same position, and the same benefits and the same pay and so forth, versus they decide, well, I'd rather get my full pay and not the 2/3, so I'm going to just go for unemployment.
So 1099 people, for example, realtors, can they apply for unemployment?
And the answer is yes. Traditionally, they were not able to, but now under these new federal legislations, this applies to not only an independent contractor or a 1099 employee, but also sole proprietors, for example. So it will be interesting. Similar question before, this is going to be an administrative nightmare, agree 100%, but now people that didn't traditionally have the rights to unemployment are now going to have better rights.
So any idea how long it will take to get PPP funds? I had to lay off 2 full-time employees and sounds like I would need to hire them back shortly after receiving funds in order to have loan forgiveness. The answer is yes and no. You may have to hire them back, you may not. So how long will it take to get the funds? We have no idea. It depends on how inundated the SBA lenders are going to be, which lender you work with, what kind of relationship you have with your lender. So that, unfortunately, I don't have a crystal ball. As far as whether or not you need to hire them back to be able to ask for forgiveness, as long as your payroll costs are not more than 25% lower than previous months, you still can ask for the forgiveness. If your payroll costs go lower than 25%, more than the previous months, like let's say you don't hire one of them and now your payroll costs are 30% lower, you would not be able to ask for the loan forgiveness. The second part of that question is, can I apply for unemployment if I own my business, but I am not seeing patients? And as Ms. Gilmore just stated, yes, unemployment has been open to self-employed and independent contractors. Okay, for unemployment, I'm under the impression you have to log into the system every 2 weeks to provide an update on your situation. What happens if you can't log into the system on a timely basis? Do you have any idea?
My understanding is that unemployment is changing everything in the state of Florida anyway, like daily. So I would go back and look, because this morning when I looked at their website, they had already made some changes, and I'm not sure that requirement is still in effect because of the fact that the system is so overloaded and people are having a really hard time getting on the system and into the system and so forth. What I would say is, if there is still a requirement, then make some type of a note on April 2nd at 10 a.m. you attempted to use the system and were not able to get on. But watch, because I do think those are types of changes that they are going to do away with on a temporary basis, at least probably for the next 30 days.
On the PPP, there seems to be restrictions on owner-employee compensation over 100,000. Can you speak to what is the interpretation of this exclusion? Okay, so there is a restriction on the payroll. The restriction is when you are trying to calculate the amount of payroll costs that you have so that you can figure out how much of a loan you can get, you have to cap people's payroll at 100,000. So if you have a couple of employees that over 100,000, you would have to decrease that payroll cost to make it $8,333 per month to get the average. Now, as far as the loan forgiveness, we're still not clear as to how much of that you would be able to get forgiven. I do believe that as long as you're using 75% of the money for payroll, you should be able to get most of the loan forgiven. But again, you can only get 8 weeks, the 8 weeks right after you receive the money. You can only get the amounts that are spent on payroll costs. rent, mortgage interest, and utility payments. Those are the 4 things that you can spend that money on that you can get forgiven, and it has to be immediately within those 8 weeks. And again, make sure your payroll costs do not go lower than 25% less than your average.
And those are the expenses for the business, not for personal business owners or officers, things of that nature.
Exactly. So please state that funds cannot be used for residential mortgage, only business mortgage or rent. That is definitely correct. When will the extra $600 from unemployment kick in?
Well, the Family First Corona Response Act took effect as of April 1st, 2020. So it would, it takes effect now, but again, you would have to wait that first week in order to, that's my understanding, before you could apply for the $600. So it wouldn't be paid in from March if you were unemployed, but going forward as of April.
Okay. What can be included in the PPP value determination? Is it only based on average monthly payroll? The answer is yes, it is based on average monthly payroll. However, the average monthly payroll cost, the definition has been expanded to include any health benefits that you're paying for your employees or yourself, owner distributions, and things of that nature. You know, I do believe you may be able to include some vendors if you have like an answering service, or you have independent contractors that work with you. Those are all included in the payroll cost for purposes of calculating the loan. What if your business is in your house? Okay, that will depend on how you've treated it previously. So if you put your expenses on your business returns, then they will be considered business expenses. If you used to put them as your personal return on your personal returns, you cannot now change them to try to make them a business expense. Can you pay back rent with the PPP? For example, April, May, and June all at once. Okay, so the personal protection or the Paychex Protection Program, you can only ask for forgiveness for the 8 weeks after you get the money. Now, the economic injury disaster loan, you can use to pay for business debt. So if the rent for April, May, and June is for, well, let's say you get your money at the end of May, your April rent, if it is a business expense, with the economic disaster and injury disaster loan, you can use that money to pay for the back rent for April. With the Paychex Protection Program, you can only use that money to pay for May and June. I work at Raymond James. We have an approved lender on our platform that will systematize what is needed and required for the PPP loan and upload that directly with the IRS Treasury. This is for the Paychex Protection Program only. Well, that's good to know. So if anybody wants to have a lender on their who wants to try that method, Raymond James does that. If you'd like to put your email or some kind of contact information in the chat for the rest of the group, please do so. If anybody else has resources for everybody, please go ahead and feel free to put them on chat as well. This is to help everybody else, so we do welcome that. And right now I have no other questions. Does anybody else have anything to add? Questions, concerns?
Well, we want to thank everybody for participating, and you have on the screen the contact information for Tanya as well as myself. And if we can assist in any way, you know, there's never a bad question or a dumb question or a question that should not be asked. There is a lot of information out there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of information out there that is not accurate. So I would, again, just say be patient, you know, be cautious, and most importantly, be safe.
Okay. And with that, we will be ending the meeting. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. Have a great and safe day.